Okay, well, welcome everybody to this wonderful talk we're going to have. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Alan Hart. I used to be the curator of gems and minerals and head of collections at the Natural History Museum in London. I was CEO of Germain Own Company, alandhart.com, little plug there. And today I'm so pleased to welcome you all, of course. It was a privilege to speak to Danny. Now, we all know Danny. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Lots of people here, lots of people online. It's a testament to our guest, of course, that so many people have come. I think it's worth saying that he's one of the most amazing figures and passionate figures in our industry. In this rather strange, beautiful, passionate world and enigmatic world of the world's finest gems and crystals. He, of course, is owner and founder of Fine Minerals International. Now, I know Danny very well. We've worked together a few times, many years. We've grown up somewhat together in different spheres of the industry, but we come together now in our, dare I say, later stages of life. But there you go. He's an internationally recognized purveyor of fine minerals, as we know. He has an immense amount of experience, knowledge, and the quality of the specimens that have passed through his hands are absolutely exceptional. But I think, like all of us, he started somewhere. And I think that's what's the interesting part of the talk today. We'll learn about Danny's beginnings. We'll learn also about some familiar things and similar things we've all been through in terms of our own experiences and our mentors that we've had. And that'd be really interesting to think about yourselves when you hear Danny's story and there are the parallels moving forward. And I think that is going to be one of the things that I'll take away from this is learning how from Danny's background he's become one of the most industry leaders and one of the thought voices of moving forward into the industry. So first, we'll just start with a very quick thing about how's the show been for you just over the past few weeks?
Well, before we go there, thank you for that amazing introduction. That was, wow, a lot. And I really appreciate it. And I'm thanking all of you for having us here. I'm thanking Debbie Boyer for inviting me to speak about this and the Bruces for hosting me and having us here. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I was a little taken aback thinking about like coming here and speaking about my life, because normally when I do presentations and talks, it's about not necessarily me. It's more about, a gold project or a mining project or, some travels that I've been on or something mineralogically based, not like how I became involved. And so at the inception of this, I was speaking with Debbie and she was like, yeah, we want you to tell your life and you can come in and, you can do it next year and, you'll do it for an hour, hour and a half and that'll be good. And I just went, okay, click, check the box, I'll do it. And about a month ago, I started thinking about it and I was like, oh shit, I got to do a talk on this. And I was like, and I have nothing prepared. I have no slides. So I apologize. You get to see this over and over and over. But I started to think about my own life. And it's funny, as an adult at 51 and going on 52, you think a lot about the now. You think about the present. You think about where you are. And when you do that, you don't go back. You don't go back. You don't stop and reflect and say, well, what was I doing at 5 years old? What was I doing at 7? What was I doing at 14? And it's all there. You remember it. All of us can recall those memories about ourselves, but they often get pushed away by stress, relationships, business, current, present, enjoyment, quality time, and you don't sit and go and dissect it. And so literally within the past 48 hours or 72 hours, Alan and I met and we started to talk about this. And simultaneously, I think Brian Swoboda started thinking about this. And he's like, so you're going to put 40 years of a career into a 1.5 hour talk? And I was like, yeah, that's going to be tricky. So they sort of, we all kind of unanimously agreed that we would do these in installments and talk about, the stages, because, the name of the talk, I think, is Rubble, Rubles, and Rocks. And, the Rubble part we'll get to today. Rocks is the theme throughout. And Rubles is the Russian story. And that was the first turning point for me, was going to Russia. And I don't even know that we'll get up to that today as we lead up. We'll see if we get there. And we'll try, because then there's other chapters to come. So I just wanted to sort of set the stage of what I'll be talking about. And it won't entirely be mineralogically based. It'll be some influences that I've experienced through my life from my parents, from friends, from travel, from different projects I've done that are so far afield from mineralogy and crystals and collecting, but sort of have all honed me to where I am today. And they all played a part in that. So that's sort of what we're going to do. Dovetailing back to your question, how do I think? What about the Tucson show this year? The show has been surprisingly strong, in my opinion, and I've heard that sentiment from so many people, so many dealers, and I see it more in a community way as well as acquisitions and sales. So there's been a lot of traffic. It feels like there's a critical mass, and I think that's a testament to this little area that we've got going from, the Fine Minerals Gallery here and all the vendors that are here, to then our house, and then Granada Gallery, and then the gallery that Brees runs right next door, and then Andres has the agate location across the street. This has really become a hub. And as the westward look has transitioned and fewer dealers are going there because there's no support and no promoter that's really pushing that forward, and because it's so dislocated geographically from this location, I think that's creating a lot of synergy and a lot of, concentration and critical mass that's creating a totally different vibe. And we saw it also in Denver. That was the first time I've seen a Denver show that was really like, it felt vibrant. You were in that space, and it was a little crowded dealer-wise, but the location and the venue was fantastic. And Christoph Keilman, my hat's off to him. He finally found the recipe there that I think works for, the next 10 years, the next decade. And it felt really good. And I'm feeling a similar feeling here this year. And I think a lot of people agree with that sort of thing. So it's exciting. And, we're in the middle of the show. I've been here since the 17th of January, and I'll be here till the 17th of February. So it's a month-long affair.
Okay, well, that's great. So let's go right back now then, Danny. Let's go right back to the very beginning.
Okay.
To the beginning of your life.
Yeah.
And tell us about your first interaction, let's say, with mineralogy or passion for minerals.
Okay. So it probably was happening unbeknownst to me, but I think probably at around 2 years old, I started to go upstate New York with my family, and it was like this ritual we did. At the very last day of school for my sister, we would go up to the country and we'd stay on a trailer park. And I mean, literally a trailer park. It was, in the woods, in the country. You paid for your little campsite, and you had your trailer, and you lived in there with your whole family. You cooked in there. It was like, a mini RV. And I would go up there, and through that exposure from like 2 to probably 8 years old, I was just basically left to my own devices running around in the woods. So there were animals, there were snakes, there were bugs, there were rocks, there was fishing, and I just had an affinity for natural things, and I was drawn to those things. Simultaneously, spending the summers there, I think, was starting to form my mind. Back in where I lived in College Point, New York, that's a suburb of Queens, and it's it's sort of New York, but it's not really New York. It's definitely not New York City. And I lived on 11th Avenue and 123rd Street. And I was allowed to go from corner to corner, which was about 200 feet, totally unattended, which, people would never do now. They never let your kids out and go. They would be like, my mom would be like, go out and play. And so I would go out, and ironically, my neighbor Jim had a tree, and the tree was in front of his house, and he decorated the tree with rock. And instead of just picking up gravel or whatever, he would go to like the local nursery, and every year he would buy a bag of white rock. And it was probably crushed pegmatite or quartz or something like that, whatever they use, some sort of aggregate. And he would throw it all around the tree, and he would refresh it once a year, which was like Christmas for me for a number of years. And I would go there, and as soon as he would replenish it, I would go through there, and I was fascinated that rock could be white. I had no idea that rocks could be white. It just didn't, I grew up in a city. Everything was black or gray. But this white rock that he put there intrigued me. And so I had a chemistry set that was given to me by an uncle from Toys R Us. And it had test tubes and like different powders, and you mix in like baking soda and vinegar, and you could do different things. And I figured that I could be a chemist. This is like at 8. And I'm taking these rocks and I bring them back to my house and I crush them into powder in the basement of the house. And then I scoop the powder and I sorted it out. And then I put the white bits in one tube and the gray bits in another tube and the dark bits in another tube. And then I mixed in a whole bunch of stuff and nothing happened. And it was very underwhelming. But I tried to do different things like this, and I had no education, no influence whatsoever to help guide me in this process. But I had this native interest. And so that progressed. And as I was doing that, one day I found in that little tree garden, I found one rock that I didn't want to crush. And I remember it was shaped like the Star Trek Enterprise to a little degree, at least in my mind's eye. And it had little flecks of silver in it, which was now looking back muscovite. And it also had little red flecks or dots in it that were translucent, and it was garnet. Which I thought was ruby. And so now I'm rich. I'm like, my precious. And so I take this back to my house and I put it in my little lunch box. That's my little collectibles, where I have like a tooth of a dog that I found out and some feathers of birds that I've collected and all my little knickknacks in this little treasure box, and I have this in my house. And so this was like the first specimen I actually kept and reserved. And so that's my first piece. And sadly, I don't have it any longer. I wish I did. It would be really fun. I do have the second specimen, which I got. And that was one that I collected when I was at the Orange County Fair. So it was county fair, upstate New York. I would go there every year with the family. We'd walk around and go on all the rides. And as you can imagine, at these little fairs, they have like a tent. One vendor selling candles, another one beeswax, and another one crystals and minerals. And so I was fascinated by it, and I saw that. And I don't know which came first, whether I was exposed to the American Museum of Natural History on a school trip, or if that happened, but it was very much near the same time. And I remember that day, my mom spent $10 and she bought me a section of an amethyst geode. Sorry, I get teary about my mom. And it's like a wedge. It's like a rind of watermelon, and it has like the purple and the green on the bottom. And I loved it. And that was like the first piece in my collection. And that still sits on my desk back in New Jersey.
And that was $10.
$10.
$10, okay.
$10. And then again, I was like, how did they sell this for $10? This thing's worth thousands. Sure. And so I took it back home and I was like fascinated with it. I thought it was the cat's meow. And then again, my experience at the American Museum of Natural History is why I'm a big advocate for museums and supporting them and helping develop them and getting them to sort of change their modus operandi, because sadly museums are very they're like sloths in their process of doing things when it comes to bureaucracy and things like that. And I think there's a real trend. I actually had a meeting today with Nicole, the new collections manager at the AMNH, and she's talking about how they're working to become more agile, more flexible, so that they can work to improve their collections, improve the ability to donate minerals, document the things they do have, and make changes. And so that's very exciting. And as I think I was in PS 129, I was in 5th grade, and I made the school trip, and I went to the American Museum of Natural History. And, you walk around the dioramas, and you see the frozen Indians and the tigers and the lions, and you see, some meteorites, which was relatively interesting. And then I walked into the Gem and Mineral Hall, and I was just like, whoa, this is serious. This is beautiful. And it struck me. It struck a chord. And I had no idea at that time that you could buy, trade, own any of these things. I thought these were, for me, as most of the population would think about the Hope Diamond, everybody knows the Hope Diamond and knows has such cachet and value. For me, the other things there were they were automatically on that league because I was, a kid. I didn't know they weren't. I just assumed if they're in a museum, these are important. They belong here. And so I had that experience, and I came home, and I just maintained this interest and continued to add things over the course of the next several years.
Can I just go back in there? When you went to the American Museum, you were inspired by the galleries that you saw there, the mineral gems and crystals that you saw there?
Absolutely.
Because one of the familiarities most of us here is, it sometimes takes one specimen just to make us go, wow, and that sets you on the path of what you want to do future in your life. So we'd say the American Museum and the museum itself was one of your golden points in that journey.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely opened my eyes to these objects. I remember it vividly. You know, the carpet was worn out. The display was already very old by that time.
Yeah.
They had this massive topaz. I don't know if you'd ever been there, in the center of like a circle. And it probably had weighed like, 200 kgs. And I remember specifically they had one showcase that was really cool. It was a round showcase, and it was sort of isolated, which had some of their best mineral specimens that were not the ones on the walls.
On the walls, yeah.
And they were actually on shelves in a round case with glass all the way around. And they had in there a famous sulfur. I called it the AM&H sulfur. And they also had in there an incredible torbanite from Musoni mine.
Yeah.
And that struck me because the color was so vivid. And I went back and saw it year after year for a number of years. And I was fascinated by it. Even later, when I was like 19, I would go back in 20.
Wow.
So yeah, the museum definitely affected it helped form the direction.
Sure, yeah. Okay. So then you went to the museum, then you went back to that fueled some of your collecting passion.
Yeah.
How did it evolve from there onwards? How old are you about 14 now? 14, 15?
No, a little younger.
Younger?
Between 11 and 12.
11, 12, okay, wow, okay.
So 11 and 12, I'm still going up and spending every summer upstate at this trailer park. This is still going on. And I'm still interested in natural sciences of different types. And I'm like collecting rocks and shells and bone parts and things like that, keeping the theme. And then one day, a real inflection point was actually from my mother. And so my mother was going shopping at a retail store, like a Bloomingdale's, Macy's, maybe like a Lloyd's in the UK.
Yeah.
Something like that. And it was called Fortune Off. And Fortune Off is no longer in existence. They went out of business, 20 years ago. But at the time, they were, a well-known store. And she was walking around there, and I think it was probably right around this time of year, in like February or so. And she went in, and they had like a pop-up table. And they had a bunch of quartz crystals. And they were laid out, and there were like signs that like feel the energy.
Okay.
And this is at like the peak of the metaphysical era. And this is like 1980-ish, somewhere in there. And she held a quartz crystal that this woman put in her hand. And she said, "Do you feel the energy?" And my mom goes, "Oh my God, yeah, I feel the energy." And she was like, "This is amazing." And she was like, "I'm going to buy one of these." And so for $150, she buys a single quartz crystal. Imagine the amount then. And they put it in a little velvet black satchel, and she takes it home. And she comes home, and she goes to my dad and I, and she goes, "I bought this today. You're going to love it. Wait till you feel the energy." And I'm like, okay, open-minded. I'm a very open-minded person. And she puts it in my dad's hand first, and he holds it, and he goes, I don't feel anything. And she goes, "Well, maybe you'll feel it, Daniel." And she takes it from my dad, puts it in my hand, and I'm like, "Yeah, no, Mom, I'm sorry, I don't feel anything." She goes, "Well, I feel it, and we're going to a store that sells this stuff next weekend." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And so this enters into our first real exposure. And this is, it was a place called Jim's Gems.
Jim's Gems.
It was on Route 24 in Wayne, New Jersey. The proprietors were Jim and Candace Kaufman. They now live in Sedona and have a gallery there. And we arrive at this shop, and it's a scene that is like emblazoned on my DNA. My kids are going to know this scene. And we walk up to the door, we open the door and we look in, and it's a long hall, and right in the middle on the right side is like a horseshoe shaped counter with all kinds of like tumbled stones, bloodstone, aventurine, serpentine, aquamarine, all kinds, every variety of, tumbled stone that you can possibly have. There's a woman behind the counter with like a tie-dye shirt on, a bandana, and like a feather in her hair, and she's burning sage. And it's just this wonderful scene that I'll never forget. And my mom goes straight to it like a bee to a flame and starts asking questions. And in 3 minutes, they're talking about chakras and energy levels and your third eye and purple and what helps your heart and what helps kidneys. And my mom just goes into it. And my dad and I are a little polarized. We're sort of looking back like, okay, what's happening here? And as we're standing there, I look to the far back of the store, and there's like 3 showcases that are lining the back with mineral specimens in them.
Okay, yeah.
That like the ones that I saw at the museum. And I remember I went, Dad, those are like the things I saw in the museum. And he's like, all right, let's go take a look. So we walk to the back of the shop. We're looking at all this stuff, and I'm like mesmerized. And my dad at this point reached like sort of, people in their lives, they have peaks,
Yeah.
And my dad was peaking at that time. His business was doing the best it was. He had a small trucking company. He had about 3 trucks. I grew up in a warehouse. All I did was, clean up everything that my dad said to do. And he was a huge influence on my life. He basically drove ambition into my brain. At 3 years old, he was telling me, never work for another man. He was telling me, I know how to do everything that any other man can do with their hands. He said, you need to learn how to do anything another man can do with his mind. And so this was sort of he never graduated high school. He was incredibly sharp, street smarts wise. He grew up the second youngest with 7 brothers in, an immigrant Italian family in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And he, there were trials and tribulations, and there was a big distance in the oldest brother. I'd never met the oldest 2, 3 brothers. They had already passed by the time I was around. And so that influence from him sort of gave me the ability to sort of get to where I went with other things in my career and how I navigated business.
Yeah.
And so he's peaking. He has some disposable income. He's doing well. And we're standing there in the store, and we start looking at stuff. And he was a huge negotiator. And actually, someone pulled me aside yesterday who knew my dad and told me a story, or reminded me of how my dad used to do negotiations, which you're going to love. It's really funny. But that day, we're standing there and we're talking with Jim Kaufman, and we're looking at stuff. And I think we bought I remember it was around $37,000 worth of stones that day, which was a huge amount of money. Sure. And it was probably 200 specimens. And there were drawers, and we were picking things and everything like that. And that was like the first real boom, we're collectors. And we took that all home. We had no displays. We laid it all out in the basement and put it on tables. And I started like a book, and I just started writing down whatever I saw on the labels, because I had I didn't know a dioptase from diopside. It was just simply, these are the names and this is where the stuff comes from.
Yeah.
And this is what we paid for it. Sorry. And that was the first real, and that was a turning point. That was a huge turning point in my life. That was one of the first real things that put me into a position where this was going to be a major part of my life. And so, yeah, that was the sort of the next phase.
Of course, at that time, there wasn't any like internet or anything like that to learn from.
Oh, no,
so where did you get your knowledge from? Did you go to the library? Did you have certain books that you used, or in people that inspired you to?
It was more people inspired. And
right,
so what happens is, so we go to this Jim's Gems, we buy all this stuff that day, and they tell us, they're like, well, if you like this, you want to do this, there's a show coming up.
Right.
The New Jersey Earth Science Show, which actually used to be a very well-attended show on the East Coast. Foreign dealers used to come, many of them from Germany and some from South America used to come. And it was timed, I think it was just right in around March or slightly after March. It was right around there. And all the dealers that were coming there, the domestic dealers, would say, oh, we just got back with everything from Tucson. And so they would show all their stuff that they had bought here at the show to collectors on the East Coast who didn't make it out to the Tucson show. And so I actually got to see this industry from the other side of the table as a collector. And I also got to see it as a young individual, very much like Hannah. And being in that position gives you a very unique perspective. So lots of dealers are interested in sharing with young people because they want to create excitement. They want to get people into the industry. They want to share the passion. And so as a curious young man, I was this open sponge, just ready to receive everything that they could throw at me. And I have a very good ability to retain information. It's one of my talents is I have near to a photographic memory, especially for crystals and minerals because I've honed that aspect of it. And so I can remember things. And so the dealers also looked at me as a tool to try and take advantage to get to my dad. And so they were like, oh, if we get this kid on board and he's interested in buying it, maybe his dad will start to buy some things. And it was true. It worked. You know, they spent time and energy on me, which I'm actually grateful for because I learned from all of these dealers and they were able then to do business with my dad. And we started building a collection. And so at that first show, we met all of these people and my dad was a very bright figure. He was someone who, you know, when you met him, you remembered him. He was there. He was present. He was very talkative. He knew how to break people down. And so, you know, break down defenses, but make people feel comfortable quickly. Yeah. And just with a couple of comments and a couple of funny jokes and making fun of himself and of them, but in a way that they didn't mind. And I watched that. I was, you know, apprenticing under my dad, not even knowing I was, just by being present. And that skill of, you know, being able to negotiate, that skill of being able to read people and see right through to what's going to strike them and resonate with them was his talent. And so I adopted that talent and tried to use that and adapted that all through my career. So that first show, we met a ton of people. We went around, we bought more specimens, and this is like 2 weeks later. My dad had he was a go-getter. He was ambitious. He was someone who, you know, he taught me very early that if you want something, you have to go get it. And there's nothing beneath you that you can do. If you have to go and dig a hole and move dirt, you're doing that. If you have to clean out a toilet bowl with your bare hand, you're doing that. And this is the world that I grew up in. There was nothing that's beneath you. You have to do whatever it takes. And, you know, he had sayings like, you know, early bird gets the worm. 2 early mornings equals an extra day. Things like this. And, you know, he had this sort of persona to me specifically that, like, if I was sitting on the TV, watching TV in my house on the sofa, and he walked into the room, I would like bolt up. I would immediately stand up and like, okay, what do I got to do? Because it was so ingrained in my mind that I needed to do this, and that there was some expectation that it really resonated with me. I remember we would work together. He taught me how to do tile, lace, drop ceilings, sheetrock, electrical work, plumbing. I can do all of this still to this day because my dad taught me this stuff. And we used to sit and work on trucks because he had the trucking company or on cars or whatever. And when he was working on something, he would do this systematically. He would turn his hand around and he would expect me to put what he needed in his hand. And if I didn't put that in his hand, he would whack my hand and he would be like, what did I need? He was like, you need to learn to anticipate. You have to constantly anticipate what people need. And this was another tool that I learned from him. And, you know, the idea of being able to connect anticipation with, you know, personalizing relationships was something that gave me a lot of tools that I didn't even know I was developing that I would use later in life to negotiate deals and buying in foreign countries and doing things that would benefit me in my career that I had no idea I had this skill set. I just applied it unwittingly. And then now I realize that, it all stemmed from this early stage.
And when you were at the show, did you suddenly realize that there was an international market ready to be tapped into, or for you to investigate moving forwards?
So that kind of clicked several years later. That was happening when I was about 18. So at 14, we go to Jim's Gems. We go to the first mineral show, and we start meeting the community. And I realized right away it was international, because there were international dealers there from all over the world. And I'm sitting there saying, wow, there's these dealers that are from other countries here showing things. And I'm like, wow, this is cool. This is fun. And so I got a flavor for that. And then I started also with a different line simultaneously. We kept going back to Jim's Gems. And when we did, I became friendly with Jim Kaufman. He was sort of one of the forefathers, and I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg, whether it was Nikolai Medvedev, who was doing Intarsia, or Jim Kaufman, or, I don't know that hierarchy. But Jim was also doing Intarsia, and he was also making, beautiful clocks and carvings. And so when I went past those three showcases into the back studio, there was a whole nother world. There were faceting tables and laps and saws and all of this stuff. And so as a young kid, again, he pulled me in, and I started to apprentice. And so I was apprenticing for him for a while, learning how to make Intarsia, learning how to make tourmaline slices, learning how to, cut stones of all different types and hardnesses and polish them, and cerium oxide and aluminum oxide and diamond powder and the whole thing. And then in my basement at the house, my parents bought me everything I needed to do this at home. And so now I'm doing this in the basement of my house in the boiler room, which is like, it's like 4x8, and the boiler's in there too. And so I'm set up with a little bench, and I'm sawing stuff and doing stuff. And in the early days, I would actually make for my girlfriends, like, oh, this is perfect. I'll make a tourmaline slice. I'll slice it. I'll polish it on both sides. I'll wire wrap it, and I'll give it away as a gift. And so I had this whole exposure to the lapidary side of it too. Yeah. And so that also helped train my brain for, what I was looking at, whether specimens were polished or, had been altered, and what, where they fell in the hierarchy of collecting crystals. So this is going on in the background. And, as being part of this new community, we started to travel to almost every collector that who would even listen to us on the entire East Coast. And I basically spent from like age 14 to like age 18, pretty much every weekend during the school year, and even some over the summer, in the back of a Sable station wagon, going from place to place to place to place. Wow. Traveling to the Springfield Mineral Show, the New Jersey Earth Science Show, the Clifton Mineral Show, shows out in Long Island, jewelry shows. We went all over the place. And my dad, he was like, again, early bird gets the worm. He'd be like, it's 4:00 in the morning. Get up. We got to get to the show. He wanted to be the first person online at every show. And so this also put into my head something that, like, okay, and it paid off. It was shocking, like how determination and diligence actually added to chance. And, there's something I always say is that, and I'm not the first person to say it, but it goes back, thousands of years, but chance favors the prepared mind. And so the more you learn, the more knowledge you have, when an opportunity comes, you're able to take advantage of it because your mind's prepared to accept that opportunity. And so that's what we did. We traveled around from show to show to show to show, meeting collectors, learning about what they collect, their styles, and et cetera. And I started to be able to identify what resonated with collectors most. And so if I saw a specimen and I was like, oh, everyone wants one of these. Everyone likes ones like this. They like it for this quality. They like it because of the luster, the clarity, the size, the isolation of the crystals. All of those things started to click in my mind, and I was able to sort of see through the field to be able to analyze very quickly what was appealing. And it was because also what struck my eye. And all of the people who are, the whole community was my mentor, were investing in me. They always were giving me free specimens. They were teaching me about, crystallography. They were teaching me about, textbook crystals and what those are and why they mattered and where things come from. And so I had this massive knowledge that grew over, probably the better part of 6 years by being the collector. Yeah. And that is what I think set the stage for me to be able to invert that and become a dealer. And that is an inflection point. And that's where I begin with Russia. But the funny story about my dad, when he would go to a show, two stories that are pretty interesting, is he would go into a booth and he would look at a group of minerals. He'd pick them out. He'd have me come in. He goes, "What do you think of these?" I'd be like, "I like those, Dad." He always used my eye, which was fun. And so I felt part of it. Yep. And he'd be like, "Okay, we want to buy these. How much are they?" And the dealer would say, "I don't know. I want $7,500 for it." And my dad would take out from his coat, he'd put $5,000 cash on the table, and he'd say, "I'll pay you $5,000. And the dealer would say, no, I can't do that." He goes, "No, don't worry about it. Here's what we're going to do." He's like, "I'm going to leave this $5,000 here with you for an hour. I'm going to come back in an hour. And if you decide you don't want it, just think about it." And they'd be like, "No, don't." And he'd be like, "Just take it. Just leave it here." He'd go away. We'd come back. 99% of the time, the minerals were packed in a bag and ready to hand over to my dad. It was hysterical. It worked like clockwork.
Do you still do that?
I don't do that. No. I can't get away with that. No. Nobody uses cash anymore anyway, so it's kind of gone. And so that was one of the funny stories. And then another very funny story that I remember distinctly, and that also shaped my negotiating strategies, was we were in Victor Yunt's booth. And I don't know how many of you know Victor Yunt, but he was a very, I would say, active dealer in probably, I think even in the 70s and right up until the early, mid 2010 or so. But Victor had a booth at all the major shows. He had beautiful things. He concentrated on European minerals in Morocco. He's a very dynamic figure, a lot of fun. He sings, he plays guitar. He's a wonderful guy, and he's a lot of fun. And so Victor had this whole booth set up, and my dad goes in there and he picks out probably almost $50,000 worth of minerals at this show. I don't remember what show it was, unfortunately, because I've been to more shows than I can ever remember. And but I was young. I was still only probably 16. And I walk into the booth and he's like, "I got all these pieces out." And he's like, "What do you think?" And I go, "Oh my God, this is amazing. Look at this one. And that's, Dad, you got to buy." And he just went, And we walked out of the booth a few minutes later and he just went whack on the back of my head. And he goes, "You never do that." He goes, "When you look at things, if you like them, just stay even keel and negotiate." He's like, "Are you trying?" And so this was like another negotiating tactic that I learned. And so absorbing all of this information by being live as a collector allowed me to effectively use that in acquisitions around the world for building my dealership and the brand. So
right now, you said the New Jersey show, yeah?
Yeah.
Obviously, the famous mining area in New Jersey, and we know about your fantastic endeavors through the years of your career, about the mines you've visited, the mines you've opened, the mines you've bought, the awesome things you brought out. That has to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So, did you ever go to New Jersey, Prospect Park, or even Sterling Hill, Oxford?
So wow, I'm forgetting all kinds of chapters here in the early times. Another very influential thing for me, and that probably also really set the hook, was Herkimer, New York.
Right. Okay.
So I'll talk about Herkimer, and then I'll talk about, remind me if I forget, the New Jersey Franklin. Mine and the Sterling Hill Ogdensburg mine.
Yeah.
So we made a trip, as hearing about the community, hearing about that you can actually go collect these things. We're going to go up and we're going to go to Herkimer and we're going to find, Herkimer diamonds. And we're going to have a great time. And so we go up there, and if you've ever collected at Herkimer, the rock is like iron. It's like stone. It's a quartz basalt, I'm pretty sure it is. And it's so hard. You hit it with a chisel and your chisel goes bing, like this, and it's so hard. And so we looked at this, and my dad has a very analytical mind, and he has great ability to like look at something and evaluate how to do it better, especially in the physical aspect. And so he's looking at this. He sees what we're going through. We're totally unsuccessful in the first trip. We're sleeping in a tent, outside because it was a camp. And he's like, all right, this is redo. So he takes his trucking experience and his work with tools to the mine. And so we go home and he takes apart leaf springs from the support on the bottom of a truck, which are like 4 feet long and they're about, 4 inches wide, about a ½ inch thick, and they're steel. And we break out the acetylene oxygen torch and we start heating them up and doing like blacksmith work and pounding them flat. And we make about 20 of these things in different sizes. And then he gets these big bars that are like, pry bars that he used to use to spin off the lugs on the giant truck tires because they would get so tight. And he gets hammers and sledges and he gets all this stuff. And now in round 2, we go back up to Herkimer, probably like a few months later. And so now we're armed to the gills with tools and we start going around. And my dad was a very physical guy. He was very strong, even though he was small size. Like I couldn't wrap my arms around him. He was very burly because he was a butcher actually by trade initially. And so he was like, it's like the Rocky movie. He would be picking up things. It was literally that at, Edmund Meyer Meats in the meatpacking district in New York. And so he was fit at that time and he would go in there and he would like do feather and wedging, without any instruction, just instinctually. And we'd follow cracks. We'd ask people around us. And there was this thought process that, and I don't know if it's true or not because I've never studied the geology there, but apparently like every 5 feet in all directions, you could find a pocket. They were sort of spaced that way through the rock there. And so we tried to follow that. And on one particular day, we found a massive pocket. And I remember it like it was yesterday. We cracked it. The boulder was like, I don't know, it was like 3 feet across and like 4 feet deep and about this thick. And we got it pried up and he would like pry it up and then put chocks and pry it up and put chocks. And at the last little bit, you heard this like, and it like opened the pocket. And right inside, you just saw all the crystals. And that was like, what the, bleep. It was like, holy shit, this is there. And we're pulling these things out. And I'm like, whoa, this changed everything for me. And so that was probably the first really, that's when the hook got set deep.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, you can find this stuff. And so then we tried to replicate this at all different places in the Northeast. There's like field collector guides and you can go, and my dad would take us into the woods with no concept of where he was going. And he'd be like, okay, we got to turn right at this log and then pull down, go by this place. And the guy said it was by the red house sign. And then we have to walk 100 feet in the woods and he would find spots. It was shocking. And, he would bring us there and we'd find like little pyrites or other quartzes and nothing of any consequence. Herkimer was still the big hurrah for what we discovered. And that led to, having an understanding of how these things actually, that you could find these things. Yeah. And that there was availability to find them.
Yeah.
And then another exposure relative to mining was going to the Franklin mine.
Right, yeah.
Which actually, if you fast forward a little bit, at 19 is my first show. So, the Franklin mine and the Franklin Mining Museum has a big display of fluorescent minerals and other minerals from the region. And right nearby is the Sterling Hill mine in Ogdensburg, which is also known for its fluorescent minerals. It's a big zinc mine. Excuse me. And I remember the guy who ran the mine, a guy named Dick Houck. And Dick is still around. I mean, he's great. And the Houck brothers ran that mine for a long time, and they've given talks here. And I met Dick with my dad probably at around 16. And he had like a old floral shop in Bloomfield, New Jersey. And he would get all kinds of mineral collections and he'd bring them there and we'd go there and actually buy them. And so that's where we also sourced pieces from the collection there. And Dick would then take us to the mine. He'd take us on tours. And I think the first time I went underground in Sterling Hill, I think I was on a school trip in high school. And I walked through the mine and got to see the whole fluorescent thing, and that was a lot of fun. And then I'd been many times after. And I even brought my daughter there when she was a little kid, and we did a film with Brian Svoboda about the Sterling Hill mine.
Sterling Hill.
Yeah, and went through, and she was actually in it, and she was like a young collector's perspective I wasn't in it, she was. And it was a lot of fun. But that's also been a big part of exposure and interest and working with Dick and all of that. It goes back to my roots when I was a kid. So that was sort of my first introspective into, mining.
Wow.
And that was fun. Yeah.
Okay. So from that point on, you've done shows, been collecting.
Yeah.
And then that's when you started that's the end of our talk, really, because we talk about when you went to Russia. Is that right?
Yeah, it's this. So leading up to this, I'm about, at this point, 18. I'm traveling around, still looking for minerals. I'm also into music and girls and rock and roll and all this other stuff. I'm doing. I had my own fencing business and roofing business. I was into herpetology, so I was raising snakes and selling the broods to a pet shop, and that was sort of my first income. I was doing that since I was 14 to like 16. I also had an interest in entomology because as we started to get to know people in the community, I met the curator of minerals of radioactive minerals. Well, he wasn't a curator of minerals. He was a curator of entomology, but he collected radioactive minerals. His name was Eric Quinter. And so I would go to his home and he had thousands of radioactive minerals all in drawers. And he also had butterflies and moths. And his job was to go out and find rare butterflies and moths across North America and then do research on them and find out. That was part of what he did. And so we became friends, and he came up to our campground when I was still going at 16 or 17, and he would take me out in the woods and he would show me, how to look for different insects. And, I was not into bugs. I was actually petrified of bugs as a kid. And my dad got me over that. We would get 50 cents allowance every day to go around and do stuff on this campground. And you could buy an ice cream or you could buy some gum or something like that. And because I was afraid of bugs, my dad didn't think it was a good idea for me to be afraid of bugs. So he'd collect a bunch of bugs and he'd put them in a cooler and he'd have that there and he'd throw my allowance in the cooler. And he would say to any of my friends, if you're willing to put your hand in there and take out the allowance, you can have it. And so I would stand there and watch them go in and move the bugs and grab them. And I'd be like, oh. And then, after about a week, I was like, screw this. I've got no ice cream. And so I just went and grabbed my change and started doing that. And then I never was scared of bugs again, which is a totally wild thing. I forgot all about that. But then meeting Eric and moving forward, we started going out in the fields and he would show me about how to catch butterflies and how to mate butterflies and how to raise moths and stuff like that. And so this becomes a whole other tangent of mine in natural sciences. And so he would go on these collecting trips and he'd mail me back eggs of rare moths and then that were laid on the inside of a paper bag. And then I'd cut them out and I would staple them to the tree that they specifically ate, and he would tell me what species they were, and I would find the tree, and I'd staple it to it, and I'd wait for them to hatch, and then they would start to eat the leaves, and then before they could be attacked by parasites, I'd sheathe them with pillowcases, tie them up, wait for them to cocoon or chrysalis, and then I'd take them down, overwinter them, and then hatch them the next year and release them. And it was just like something I did for fun on the side. And so, but Eric was another influence on my life, and another, aspect into minerals, and I learned all about radioactive minerals through him. And so it was a good understudy because he had one of everything that was radioactive, or 10 of everything that was radioactive. Right. And and so that was sort of the lead up to my first international trip and me becoming a dealer. And that's like the next turning point or the next step in my journey. I was about 18. We were going to shows, and we started to see, because of the timing and because of perestroika and the change in the former USSR and the Soviet Union, that minerals were starting to come over to the American shows. And so we were seeing fluorites come in from Dalnogorsk. And this happened through, I think Victor Yunt actually was one of the dealers, and Herb Aboda, who was one of my really important mentors. Herb and I go back a very long time. And he took a lot of time and energy and doted on me as a youngster and helped form the way I think about things. And they would bring these incredible fluorites to the shows, and they were optically clear. And just like nothing anyone had ever seen before. Not Illinois, Chinese fluorides weren't even on the market yet. That hadn't even happened. That's like fast forward 1994, 95. And so you're seeing these fluorides that defy logic as far as their clarity, their sharpness, their isolation of the cubes, the luster and the matrix. It was just like, wow. And so they're starting to trade, and they're trading for quite a lot of money. And my father was like, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a way to get these things at a different price. And he's like, he was like, okay. He used to subscribe. At this point, we're subscribing to Rocks and Minerals. So you're asking about resources I had. I had Rocks and Minerals. We had Lapidary Journal. We had the Mineralogical Record. And Rock and Gem, I think, were the 4 publications that would now come regularly to our home. And I was always looking through those. And he decided to put an ad in the Lapidary Journal. And the ad was in the classifieds, and all it said was, want to buy rocks from Russia, will pay cash. That was it. 2 lines, all bold. He paid like $12 for the thing to run every month. And this guy calls him up. His name is Ruslan. And he goes and visits my dad at his warehouse, because my dad had a trucking company, at a warehouse in College Point. And Ruslan shows up. This is unbeknownst to me. I don't know this is happening. And so Ruslan shows up, and he comes in, and he says to my dad, I can get you rocks from Russia. And he goes, okay, cool. And he goes, when are you going to go back? He goes, well, and this guy's, he was probably 2 years older than me. So at the time, I'm like 19, he was like 21. And he goes, I'm going back in like a month. And he goes, well, what do you need? He goes, I need $10,000. He said, with $10,000, I can go buy a bunch of minerals. And you got to imagine, this is pre-cell phone, pre-internet.
Yeah, sure.
This is, beepers, maybe. It's still, payphones are everywhere you go. And then like home lines, right? And so he's got this guy's telephone number, and that's it. And he goes, you seem like a trustworthy guy. Here's 10 grand. Good luck. Have a good trip. So the guy goes, he travels to Russia. He buys a bunch of rocks, and he comes back like 2 months later, and he walks into my dad's office, and he's got boxes and stuff, and he starts laying out on tables all these minerals that he bought on his trip to Russia. And my dad looks at him, he goes, I learned 2 things today. He goes, oh yeah? What'd you learn? He goes, you're honest. You came back, you could have just ran away with the money. You didn't have to do anything. He goes, yeah, I did. And he's like this. And he goes, what's the second thing? He goes, you don't know a damn thing about minerals. He goes, this is all trash. None of this has any value. And, we're not going to be able to do anything with it. And so he was like a little, dumbstruck, but he was like, but I know that my son really understands minerals. He's like, and what we're going to do is you're going to go on a trip to Russia, and you and my son are going to go to Russia together. And he said, sure. And so fast forward a couple of weeks, I had just gotten a motorcycle from my sister's boyfriend at the time. He had upgraded, and he just gave me his old bike. And I think it was a Yamaha something or another. And I pick it up. I'm all excited because it's my first motorcycle. I don't even know how to drive. I figure it out on my own. Like I'd seen it on TV. I can figure this out. And I've driven all kinds of equipment with my dad. So I was driving trucks and big heavy machinery and like dirt bikes and quads and all kinds of stuff at, very young ages, with my dad. He just basically put me on his lap and let me drive everything. And so I didn't have a fear of this. So I got on a motorcycle. I was like, yeah, gears up, gears down. I'll figure this out. And sure enough, I did. And I pick up my girlfriend, Orianne. We drive back to the house, pull up at the front drive of my parents' house in Whitestone. We'd moved from College Point at this point. And there's this scene going on. And as I pull up, my dad, who wears consistently black nylon or polyester pants, very typical Italian, he has nice chest hair sticking out with a gold chain and a Saint Christopher medal there, and the collar, and I think it was a sham shirt. I mean, my dad was totally that guy. And he's standing there. I'm pulling up my motorcycle. There's like an IROC, all black, and a woman with platinum blonde hair in a tight black dress and like 5-inch pumps leaning on the hood, and a guy standing there that looked like death himself. He was like 6'4". He had straight black hair. His skin was like snow white, and he spoke. It also sounded like death. He was like, "Hello, ya zavut Ruslan." And he literally just had this deep voice, and he weighed maybe like 100 pounds. He was like thin as a rail. He had a all black on, no color to the man whatsoever, dark black sunglasses and a trench coat like this. And I'm just looking at this scene. I'm like, what? This is weird. I'm like, so I get off the motorcycle and I'm like, hey, Dad. And he's like, hey. And I'm like, what's going on? And he goes, this is Ruslan. And I go, okay. He goes, you're going to go to Moscow with Ruslan on your next break. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he goes, I got 3 things I want to talk to you about. And I'm like, okay. He's like, number 1, get rid of the motorcycle or I'm going to break your legs for you. And I'm like, okay. He goes, and it happened in this order. And then he goes, number 2, that's Ruslan. You're going to go to Moscow with him on your next break, and you're going to buy a bunch of minerals and bring them back. I'm like, okay. And I go, what's number 3? And he goes, I wasn't joking about number 1. And so I was like, okay, got it. And so I kept the motorcycle for about another 3 days secretly, and then gave it away and got rid of it. And then the next thing you know, I'm at this point 19 years old. I've got 6 credits to go to get my bachelor's in business management from Stony Brook and Pace University. And I was already on the path of going to University of Pennsylvania, to the Wharton School of Business. And my life plan at that point was like another 8 years of school. I was planning on getting a master's in business management and then a joint JD in corporate law. And I had this idea of practicing international law. A lot of it inspired by the movie Wall Street. I think is it Wall Street, the first one?
Yeah.
With Charlie Sheen?
No, it's just in me. It was Charlie Sheen, wasn't it?
It was Charlie Sheen and, and Michael Douglas. And I think it is Wall Street. And so I was like, international mergers, lots of money. This sounds good. And so that's the direction I was going. And I had like signed up for another, it was probably 6 to 8 years of school if I was going to do it. And so that was my life path. And then I made my first trip to Moscow. And so my parents arranged it. I was getting ready to fly. I think it was on winter break. Because it was winter. And it was winter break in the second semester. So it was like January, February time. And this is 1991. And Russia had just like opened up and changed it was a whole new place. Yeah. And I was unaware. I was just like, yeah, I'm going to Moscow. Woo. It's going to be great. And I get to know this guy, Ruslan, on the plane. I mean, I had spent 7 minutes with him before that. And the next thing you know, we're on this, 10-hour flight to Moscow, and we arrive at Sheremetyevo, and that's my first trip. And so on that trip, I had $10,000 that my dad loaned me. And we started going around from dealer to dealer that he knew. And I used what I had learned at all these shows and growing up in the community to decide what to buy. And so I bought a bunch of things. I brought them home. And I guess we'll tail out here with my first show because we're right at that point. And I bought a bunch of things and used my eye and what I'd learned from all the dealers to choose what to buy. I bring all those things home. At this point, there's no customs. At this point, you just walk through, the airport with this stuff. You give $100 in your passport to the agent as you're going through, and he just goes like this, welcome. And you just go right out. And we're carrying 60 kgs of minerals, each of us. And we get on the plane and we fly home. And the deal I had with my dad was that he got to pick whatever he wanted at cost from what we bought. And then anything else, we were able to sell and we got to keep the profit. And so on this first trip, with $10,000 seed money, we bought so many minerals. My dad kept the ones that he wanted for the collection, which I later inherited decades later. But we took the other ones and we went and brought them to market. And my first show as a dealer was out of the back of my mom's Sable with a table and just I don't even think I had a tablecloth. And I just put out the stuff that I had brought back from Moscow. And we were at the Franklin Mining Museum or the Franklin Mineral Show, which is at the museum, but they have an outside courtyard where people show up like a flea market that you can walk through, and they had the good dealers inside. I couldn't get a spot inside. I was, way down the list. And so I put all my stuff out, and, a lot of people were shocked that I had like gone to Russia and brought this stuff back. And, we did really well. We sold over the next 6 months, probably $50,000 worth of stuff, apart from what my dad kept. We made good profit. And I decided that was it. I changed my entire life path. I dropped out of school, didn't get my degree, didn't finish college, and started making trip after trip after trip to Moscow. And that's the beginning of the Russia episode.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked a lot.
We have.
I think it's been a fascinating insight into that. I'd like to ask you a few things.
Yeah, sure.
You would have made a great curator. I've got to say that as a former curator, because your attention to detail has been fantastic. I mean, personally myself, when I look at, I think the important thing these days is to get the information out there.
Yeah.
And tell people about our subject. There's some issues about the pricing of course that we have nowadays. Why are things priced so high? How much it costs to collect, how much it costs to mine. And I think you're very good at that. We've worked on this slightly in terms of some narratives and things.
Absolutely.
And I look at some of the publications, and also the publications being important. Some go-to publications, of course, for me are the Pednera. If you've not read that, please read that. The attention to detail about Danny's endeavours in opening this mine are fantastic. Similarly, the Sweet Home Mine, that's another publication.
That was the inspiration.
I look at Peterberg here. His Afghanistan pegmatite volume is absolutely awesome. But it's all familiar in getting information out there so people can read this and be inspired. And also, I think, inspiring the young mineral collector.
Yeah.
And say it's not a closed subject, this is. You can go into it. And like yourself, you're a sort of a person that you can emulate. I know this very different time these days in terms of the world we live in, but it's still possible to do that.
Absolutely.
And in the future, of course, we spoke about it a lot, new markets. We crystals are going into the fine art world. The publication you just released is awesome. We worked in an institution called Masterpiece in the UK. Well, I didn't work. I joined Daniel in a few days where he was presenting an art fair. And, it's the first time crystals have been at an art fair, and everyone at this art fair could not believe what they were looking at. And similarly, they couldn't quite understand what they were looking at. But once you've spoken to them and you discussed it, you could just see it opening up to a whole new audience.
It was incredible.
That can only get best for the industry.
Yeah, it was, that experience for me was sort of, it was another, sort of eye-opener and an awakening to see how much the world doesn't know about what we love and the passion that we all have. Me speaking to all of you is preaching to the choir. You all love minerals. Otherwise, you're usually not here. You're not listening. You have a passion for it. And we have all different views of what we like about the industry and what what our interests are. But we're unified in that. We're a community. Whereas this was the first time I really felt that we were in a community that didn't understand and had no aspect, no what's the word I'm looking for? Prohibitions. No, it's not the word. Preconceived notions about what they were going to look at. They were just exposed. And I will tell you that because of the fact that they had seen paintings before, sculpture before, artwork before, of all varieties, all on display, but this they hadn't seen before. It was the belle of the ball. I mean, the amount of energy that people spent absorbing what we were saying, spending time in the booth. I mean, all the dealers around us were giving us the side eye because their booths were empty and our booth was full from like 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and even sometimes past. We had to the security would come to us and be like, you got to get these people out of your booth. And I'd be like, I'm not kicking out customers and telling them they got to go home. They're like, we're closing. I'm like, no, I mean, you tell them. I'm not going to tell them. And so it was really like that for almost I don't know how many, was it like 7 days?
Yeah, 7 days.
Yeah, it was intense. I mean, the way I'm talking right now was 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day, all day, to people who just wanted to learn and experience and see it. And so that's also sort of become part of my mission is that, I become successful. I'm not looking to gain more acclaim or success or notoriety. It doesn't bring me any good. If anything, I want to take a step back. But I happen to be a good orator and I happen to be a good teacher. and I want to share that with people. And that is sort of what I'm looking for, is the ability to get that message across to people and let them experience what we all love in a different way. And I think that will benefit it'll be trickle-down economics, meaning when the rest of the world is able to know the difference between fluorite, rhodochrosite, and quartz at, the simplest level. Let's say, I don't know that they'll ever get to chalcocite and wittichenite, but, if they get that far, that's going to really develop and support the sciences and the next generation that wants to go off into these different facets of what we do. And so I think it's really important.
Brilliant.
And I hope to do more of those.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so thank you, Dan. One thing also,
Yeah.
So I won't leave my credit card on your desk to say I'll come back later just to see what you feel. And I won't go into your booth and say, I love everything, because then you'll know I really want something.
Exactly.
Let's take it that way. But thank you, Danny.
Thank you.
It's been
Alex.
fantastic talking to you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.